Welcome to the Christian Readers Podcast, where you can escape into fiction without sacrificing your values. I'm your host, Colleen Mitchell, author of The Chronicles of Talam. Today I'm talking with Cathryn deVries, author of Son of Osivirius, a science fantasy novella. Cathryn and her daughter Emmeline are an award-winning writing team based in Australia who write no-spice romantic fantasy and sci-fi. Their fantasy stories meet readers in our messy realities and give us all the feels without the spice. Son of Osivirius is Cathryn's debut, released in February of 2026. So, Cathryn, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. So great to be here.
I'm excited to dive in. Let's just start with the question that all introverts dread, because I think most writers are introverts. But tell us about yourself and how you got into writing.
Well, obviously, I'm Australian. I've always loved reading and writing. So, of course, it made perfect sense that I went into engineering as a career.
Okay,
Uh,
okay, I have to stop you right there because I also have an engineering degree, and yet I don't use it. I do writing instead.
yes, yeah. I think it happens to a lot of us, actually. There's something there, I think. So, I was in the Air Force for a few years as an engineer, but when I became a mum, I actually I knew from my third year at uni that engineering wasn't for me. That's unfortunately when I decided, yeah, this is not what I wanted to be doing. But anyway, so I served out my time. And then when I became a mum, I thought that's what I want to do. And so I ended up homeschooling our four kids. I still homeschooling one of them, and one of them is in senior. So that's happening. But how I got into writing was sort of through it was almost through that homeschooling experience because I was always encouraging my kids writing. I'd sort of given up writing for the most part at the end of high school, even though I loved it. But I didn't see I didn't see a future in it for myself, I guess. And then as adult life went on, I'd still loved reading, but I figured my own creativity had dried up. But I could, but when I was teaching my kids how to write, I could see their creativity blossoming, and I really was encouraging that. So my daughters, in particular, both very excellent writers, and it was through teaching my eldest daughter to write and like reading a lot of she got really into fantasy novels like me because I had a whole lot on my shelf obviously, and like it just kind of as a natural progression, and she got into Dungeons and Dragons at about age 14 and wanted us to play a campaign as a family, and I said, yeah, that sounds cool, let's do that. So we all made characters and things, and started off as the DM with the starter set. We got into a few months play, and she's like, I really want to write a campaign. And I'm like, okay, great. Like, I'm always, yeah, just anything that would encourage her to follow her passions was, yeah, something I was going to go for. So she did that. And she was going to be the DM for that campaign, obviously. So that's Dungeon Master, in case anyone is not familiar with the term. So they basically lead lead the game. So we all made characters. I made my character. Emmeline kept on asking me about my character's backstory because that was going to be important for things she was planning. And we started playing the game, and we got a few months in, and just having so much fun. And this was a real bright spot in my life at that time because our family was going through some very hard times, very challenging emotional stuff going on. And this was like just a spot of joy in our week, playing this game together for a few hours. And I didn't want to lose that. I wanted to hold on to it. And I just spur of the moment, what if I start chronicling our gameplay so that we can revisit it and laugh and remember this time, and we can tell our grandchildren about this time because it's there in hard copy. We've got it, and it's just a great family story. I'm very much interested in leaving a legacy. That's always been something very much on my heart, to leave a legacy for my children and grandchildren and whatever. So I did. I started writing. First of all, starting with my character's backstory because that was important. And then just that just unlocked something in me. And like the words were just coming out so fast and easily. I don't think I had writer's block the entire time I was doing that first draft because I always knew what I was going to write because we'd already played it. So I was just chronicling what we had played. So I didn't have to come up with any ideas of what happened because I was just writing down what I already knew had happened. And thousands and thousands and thousands of words just started to come out. And I think I got to somewhere around the 50 or 80,000 word mark and realized that this was becoming a novel. It wasn't just me chronicling the game anymore. I was actually doing things that, I was reading in books. Like there was character development happening, and I was processing a lot of the emotional stuff that I was going through in real life. I was processing on the page, and it was coming out through the characters' interactions, and it and I was challenged at that point of what is this going to be? Is it going to remain just a chronicle, or is God calling me into a direction that I had given up on, hadn't even really realistically considered for so long. And so I wrestled with that idea for a long time because this story was very personal, and I didn't want something so special and meaningful to me to be basically torn apart to shreds by reviewers. Because I know that happened. Like in the back of my mind, that was always like, the critique of my work of something so personal, like that was going to be an issue. So I really wrestled with God about that. And it's like I don't know if I want to publish this. I don't know if I want to expose that those deep parts of myself to the world. But so I had lots and lots of long prayer walks talking about this with with God, and trying to hand it over. Like every time it's like, okay, it's your story. Ultimately, it's your story. This writing is yours. I will do with it what you want me to do with it. And then I would take it back. And then I know it's yours. It's yours. So this went on for a little while, but yeah, eventually I was like, "Ah, okay, fine. You're right. The story is bigger than just our family. Other people this could touch other people's hearts. And ultimately, if that's what you want to do, if that's the contribution you want me to make to the world, like to as part of its healing process, then okay, I'll do it." And so then I really threw myself into actually learning how to write properly, revising, and turning it into something publishable. It's very, very, very different now from the initial first draft chronicle, which sounded exactly like a D&D game, and now it doesn't. But yeah, that's basically how I got into writing.
So that original D&D book is now a trilogy, right? With
Yes.
it's with a publisher, is that right?
Yes, that's right. It's going to be hopefully published next year. I've had a little bit of news, like there might be a delay in the timeline, but hopefully next year. Yes.
Which means that Son of Osivirius is technically not your first book, even though it's your first published.
That's right. It's actually the fourth book I've written, but yes, first published.
Is the D&D book, is that considered science fantasy as well, or is it lit
No,
RPG?
no, I wouldn't call it lit RPG anymore because all the all the markers that would make it lit RPG have been stripped out. It's very much a fantasy novel. It's a romantic fantasy novel, but the romance isn't the emphasis. It's the fantasy that's the emphasis.
So for science fantasy, which Son of Osivirius is,
Yes.
what is that as a genre for people who don't know? Because your book was the first time I'd ever heard of science fantasy.
Okay. Well, it looks a lot like science fiction on the outside. It's futuristic. There's technology usually involved. But the thing that makes it a bit different from pure science fiction is that there is a magical element to the world building. So something that that cannot be purely explained by science. So actually, even though it's not a genre that is spoken of a lot, it's a genre that people know because Star Wars is science fantasy. Like the Force is essentially magic, and Dune is science fantasy. There's, the whole Bene Gesserit religion kind of thing is a fantastical element. There's the sandworms, they're kind of pretty fantastical, even though it's a creature that I guess, could is just regarded as an alien. But anything where it's anything where there's a sort of a magical element to the futuristic environment can be considered science fantasy rather than science fiction, although there's a lot of crossover and a lot of debate, and there will be people who tell you, no, Star Wars is science fiction. It's not, there's no fantasy in there. Yeah, but, whatever. But
It
yeah,
just makes
that's
me think
what's.
of, with Star Wars in particular, it makes me think of, I think it's episode one when Qui-Gon is talking about the midi-chlorians. I'm like, this is dumb. Just let the Force be the Force.
Yes,
Stop trying to
yes.
explain it.
Yeah, the original ones, like they kind of wrecked the original one, the original world building in that prequel series.
To be fair, Star Wars retcons itself a lot.
Yes, true. But anyway, yeah, so that's what it is as genre. Like most people there's not a shelf, there's not a separate shelf for it in the bookshop.
Unfortunately.
It's shelved with science fiction, but that's what it is.
Okay. So earlier you mentioned that you had a lot of prayer walks with God wrestling over this idea of publishing the D&D story. So
Hmm.
now, how does your faith in God play a part in your writing with your current projects?
So there's a lot of there's a lot of theology gets subtly woven in to the world building itself in particular. That's one area that I really wanted to bring God into, because in my world is sort of a parallel to this world, and the same kinds of underlying principles of who God is and how God operates is woven into that world, but in a way that is more visible, I guess, than our world. So that is something that I think Christians will notice, but non-Christians can still like accept as fantasy world building. I guess I wanted it to be subtle because one of the one of the things that one of the things I did wrestle with God about was, am I writing for Christians? Am I writing for a secular audience? And it was really more, I felt called to write for a secular audience and just help move people one or two steps closer towards faith. So the actual how the world is set up, how God works in this world through a musical sort of magic is very much something that I worked together with God about. It sounds weird, but like, okay, so I talked to God about that. How do I do this? How do I bring this? How do I bring this? How do I bring you into this world in a way that feels natural, but still is obviously you? And every every time I came up with a roadblock or a problem, like there would a solution would come, like until it did feel just very natural that I wasn't forcing anything into the pages. Also, just with the emotional journey, like of the characters and the insights, I've received so many insights over the years, and a lot of them make their way into the book as well, of just different ways of seeing things, different ways of seeing problems and people and circumstances that I had to grow through myself. And now my cat, so and my characters going through it helped me go through it as well, so I could bring the lessons into my own life and put them in there in the characters' lives. And so hopefully people will get a little window into the love of God and into the mysteriousness of God, and how things don't always work out like we think they should, but there's a bigger purpose behind everything. So, yeah, basically that's everything gets everything that goes into my books gets filtered through my relationship with God. Yeah.
I really did like it's magic flying cats for people who haven't read the book blurb. But yeah, they're very awesome. I finished the book earlier today. But I really did like how they're like the way that they worked that magic aspect was just so different from things that I've read before. But then at the end, I'm not going to spoil anything, but there was a choice presented, and it's similar to the choice that people are presented when they're looking into faith and belief. And the fact that a character was presented with this choice and then chose something that maybe we didn't want that character to choose. It was really interesting to read it like that because I really saw how how faith came through in that point. It's like, yes, you were presented this offer and everybody has to make that choice. And it was presented in a way that didn't feel like religion, which I really liked because it reaches, like you said, to the secular audience. Because we can, like, even a secular person can look at that and go, that's interesting, and maybe that's the thing that gets them one step closer, like you said. But yeah, Magic Flying Cats, you should totally read the book.
Yeah. Yes, do I? These cats are awesome. I love them so much.
So since I try not to spoil that scene, do you have a favorite non-spoilery scene in the book?
Yeah, that scene that you're talking about is one of my favorites, that philosophical confrontation. That was very, very satisfying to write. It wasn't, funnily enough, it wasn't even in the, it didn't make it into the book until one of the last drafts, actually. And like, now I think, how could it not ever have been in there at one stage? Because it just fits. But yeah, that was very, very satisfying to write. I also really enjoyed Jaden's first Masu ride. That is definitely a favorite scene, and really visualizing how all that sort of happened and just the freedom and release in that chapter was such a shift for him. And yeah, I really enjoyed writing that one. And probably my third favorite scene is the ending scene with Jaden and Nettle. It's not your typical romantic ending, and I think that's what I love about it so much. And yeah, bringing everything around to that conclusion that wasn't like where, my main character Jaden, like he really had to confront his own selfishness in that final scene. And yeah, so I really that scene sort of means a lot to me as well. And as I said, it's not your typical romantic ending, and I think people are going to really enjoy it too. I've had reviews like, point to that scene as a favorite, so I think it works.
I think part of why it works is because readers are so used to the typical romance ending that not having that typical romance ending is like, oh, this is a breath of fresh air. I like it. So,
Yeah.
Jaden and Nettle are your main characters. Masu are the flying cats. Again, flying cats go by the book. So, do you have a favorite character? Is it one of your main characters? Is it a side character?
Yeah, it's interesting. In this book, it's probably the side characters that are my favorites. Like I'd probably have to say like Flint, and who is Nettle's brother, and Shanna, the main Masu, are probably my favorite characters. Yeah, I enjoyed, like, I like the two main characters. I think they work as main characters, but yeah, as to who I want to be friends with, it's probably definitely Flint and Shanna.
I was gonna say that Shanna was my favorite character. I was like, oh, big cuddly Mama Masu.
Yes, yes, yeah. She's such a wonderful matriarch.
Yeah. Were there any scenes that you loved that you ended up having to cut? Because that has happened to me plenty of times as an author.
Thankfully, no in this one. This draft, it was all adding. Every draft had things added to it, and the it would grow. I had scenes that I needed to completely reshape, and so yes, I had words that needed to cut, but they were not words I was attached to because I could see that something wasn't working in the scene. But the scene itself still made it through. So yeah, my very first draft, Nettle's POV wasn't even in there at all. It was a single POV story, and I think it was I had a critique partner read it, and the biggest issue that he found was like it moved too fast, and the romance moved too fast, which is not what I wanted. And so the solution that I came up with that was actually to add Nettle's POV in to slow the story down. It's still fast paced, but it's having her POV in there just dramatically improved the story because we now had both sides of the equation looking at the same problem. And so that was all in there. And actually, chapter 2 was the last chapter I wrote. So that's the one in Nettle's point of view, and that didn't make it through. That didn't make it into the book until after beta readers had read it. So, it was nearly ready for, publishing, and that scene got written. So, yeah, in this one, it was all adding, which was really great. In my trilogy, unfortunately, I have had to cut many, many, many scenes, which was yeah, that was hard. Especially since like I spent one entire draft learning how to write fight scenes well, and fight scenes are hard. And there were so many in this book because it was a D&D campaign. We were fighting all the time. And so I rewrote and polished every single fight scene in the entire trilogy, only to discover I had to cut half of them because there were just too many. That was pretty gutting. Um, yeah.
Knife to the heart. Oh, oh, that's funny.
Yes, yes. Funny, but not funny at the time, but funny in hindsight.
Funny in hindsight, yeah. Yeah. So earlier when I introduced you, it's you write romantic fantasy. So I want to
Yes.
one of my last questions is about the differences between romantic fantasy, fantasy romance, and then romantasy, because you did an Instagram post about this explaining those differences. So for listeners who struggle to discern which is which is right for them, what are the differences between romantic fantasy, fantasy romance, and then romantasy?
Yep, yep. So romantasy is technically an umbrella term that covers both. I I personally don't like it much anymore because it has a lot of association with smut now, even though smut is not a key component of romantasy per se. So fantasy romance, the emphasis is on the romance. So whichever the final word in the pair of words is the one that gets the emphasis. So fantasy romance has the emphasis on the romance, and it appeals to romance readers who want to take their like read about romance in a fantasy setting. So the themes and the stakes of fantasy romance are all romance themes. They're about love, belonging, the things you would find in romance novels. The world is kind of a backdrop for the romance in fantasy romance. In romantic fantasy, the emphasis is on the fantasy. The second word, fantasy, gets the emphasis. So if if fantasy romance is a 60-40 split with romance being the 60, it's the opposite in romantic fantasy. If it's a 60-40 split, the 60% goes to the fantasy this time. So it appeals to fantasy readers. And the themes are more about survival, life and death stuff. But it would be a very, very different book if the romance was taken out. So the romance serves to heighten the stakes and like significantly raise the stakes for any quest, war, political machinations that are actually carrying the plot. Because the plot is a fantasy plot. It's not a romance plot. And the world building is very, very important in romantic fantasy. The elements are significant and they have to stand up to pressure testing. Whereas in fantasy romance, authors can get away with some fairly thin world building. And if for fantasy, like me, I'm a classic fantasy reader. I've been immersed in the genre since I was about 10 years old. Like I'm used to robust worlds and all that. So sometimes if I accidentally read a fantasy romance book thinking it's a romantic fantasy, like I start twitching, and it's like that's not real. That would never like and I start picking holes in the world building because fantasy romance is not my preferred split. I pref Me personally, I prefer the romantic fantasy where I get the emotions and the relationships and the love being really important, but it's the plot that is at the end of the day is a quest or something that has an adventure, has life and death stakes at the end of it, and like we're working towards we're working towards making the world a better place, not just two people getting together. So yeah, that's in a nutshell the difference, and neither's right or wrong, it's a preference. But yeah, and romantasy is the umbrella term, it technically covers both. It's probably more associated with fantasy romance in the commercial side of things, but yeah, it can refer to both, which makes it very confusing for readers. And so yeah, I'm glad to try and clear that up a little bit.
Well, I'm glad you did because I actually thought it was the opposite way around, where the emphasis is on the first word, not on the second one. Because like that's the
Uh-huh.
first word you see is romantic fantasy. Ah, must be a romance. But now that you've explained it, it kind of does make more sense where fantasy romance, the actual genre of romance, is in there, whereas romantic is not a genre. That's how
Yeah.
it clicked in my brain. So thank you.
Uh-huh. No worries.
Is romantic fantasy then going to be a consistent thing that you write in the rest of your books?
Yes, probably. I enjoy writing it. I guess there'd be some times where maybe romance doesn't come into it, or it's not, but there'll always be some kind of love in it, even if it's like a really strong friendship or familial love. So that's not technically romantic fantasy. But at yeah, at the moment, everything that I've got planned has a romantic element in it, which I haven't planned too far ahead, but I'm not someone that is like overflowing with ideas. And I'm very, very much a one project at a time person. I don't know how authors who are dealing with multiple projects do it. That's not how my brain works, but
As someone with multiple projects that keep presenting themselves to me, it's a matter of I gotta focus on the current thing and then put everybody else on the back burner. And then if I have ideas for them, I go put them in their little note file. But like, you get to go sit for a while while I finish this one thing. So, what are you working on right now?
what I'm working on right now is book two of my trilogy. So book one is all ready to go. It's with the publisher. Just need to get edits done, cover designed, all that kind of stuff. Book, but in rewriting book one, I had it was a page one rewrite. I had to completely re-engineer the entire story to make it work as a story. So in doing that, I broke lots of things in book two. So now I have to do the same process with book two, completely re-engineer it. And I'm in that process now of rewriting with my developmental editor and getting this story rewritten and in shape for when the publisher wants it, which is probably like at the end of this year. So yeah, that's my
Okay.
big focus right now.
So for those people who want to get familiar with your work and also read about magic flying cats, where is the best place to get a copy of Son of Osivirius?
Well, you can head to my website, and there are lots of retail links to all different stores, including Amazon. It's currently on Kindle Unlimited, but not for much longer. I'm going to go wide with the ebook. And on my website, there's also a link to buy directly from me, which is the only place you'll ever be able to get the illustrated version unless you're come to a convention. But that's only going to be relevant if you're living in Australia.
Or want to
So,
take a flight there?
yes.
And is your website also the best place to connect with you online?
So on my website, you'll see an opt-in to sign up for my newsletter, and that's actually where you can get Lightning Hunter, which is a non-spoiler epilogue for the romantic fantasy trilogy that is coming out. So you can get a taste of that world and meet one of the characters who was played by my youngest daughter. And I'd love to connect with readers that way and it's free.
That's awesome. All right. Thank you so much for joining us to talk about your book and all the things that we discussed. It was really great talking with you.
Thank you so much. I had such a great time.
All right, everybody. Thanks for listening to today's episode. If this resonated with you, please share it with your friends so they can find something new to read that involves magic flying cats. God bless, and until next time, goodbye.